I came invited by David Edwards, with whom I taught last semester. We had a course called The Art and Science of Making, and it was in the engineering department. And my colleagues in language and literatures were confused about why I wasn't teaching language and literature. And the reason was because I was bringing 21st century skills to the engineering school. This is one of the scandals of reason that I talked about. When Kant says that the Enlightenment is not just reason, not even adding practical reason, which is social and moral reasoning. It's not enough, because if it's only reason that directs us, we're impatient with everything else, with passion, with doubt, with the social. And so to save sociability, which was an important value in the 18th century, one that Adam Smith talks about too, as the human condition, he wrote a third critique. No one asked him for a third critique. In fact, a lot of readers assumed that he was already senile. Why would he write a whole book on aesthetics if he was a serious philosopher? But the third critique is an exploration of how judgment works. Without judgment, reason becomes scandalous. It goes off on a narrow track. It doesn't look to the right or to the left, and so we lose our connection with other human beings. And the joke today, the scandal of reason today, is that everyone in STEM knows that the 21st century skills are what they are missing. And of course, the 21st century skills are all humanistic skills, interpretive skills. So David and I managed to smuggle them back. Yeah. I'm not sure we have enough time. This is the problem that Lawrence Lessig brought up yesterday and today again. You know, according to Lessig, and he may be right, we're already doomed, because the market has its dynamic, its interests, and when someone suggested today that all we need is different drivers, different motivations, I saw him break out in a smile, an ironic smile, because of course that's what we need, but given the market forces, we're not going to get there. So it's a real concern. Now, if I took that concern as the only thing occupying me, I would be as paralyzed and therefore irresponsible as I think some academics become. Since I'm a teacher, and I believe very much in education as formation, we need to educate better. We need to educate young citizens better and save their parents also from the scandal of distinguishing between the importance of reason on the one side and the importance of judgment on the other. So my proposal, and if we have time, I'm sure it will work. If we don't, then nothing will work. My proposal is to reform public education. Because as I said, public education as it exists everywhere but Finland probably, sits children in rows with one person in the front who poses the questions and waits for the one right answer per question. So what in fact we're teaching our children and our teenagers and each other is authoritarianism. And with the authoritarianism comes competition, conflict, because there's one right answer per question, and the kid who gets it right is resented and hated by everyone else, and bullying is ignited. We want to know how to stop bullying in the schools. Well, we keep starting it. And if that weren't bad enough, we're also generating corruption, because when you sit people in rows, the ones who are invisible in the back do whatever they want, and they're not responsible to anyone. If we simply change the choreography in the classroom, we would have an enormous difference. When you sit in circles, everyone is vulnerable, visible, interesting, because you're looking at faces, not at the back of someone's neck. When you look at the back of someone's neck, they are things. I remember a comment of a teacher in the south of Colombia, which is still a violent area. The child wanted to know if he could make a gun on the 3D printer. And she said to the 11-year-old boy, "Why do you want to make a gun on the printer?" He said, "Well, I need to make some money." And she said, "You mean you would kill for money? How can you look at someone and kill them?" And he laughed and treated her like some naive child and said, "No, you don't kill people in the front, you kill them in the back." So we are training people to look at backs, not at faces. And one of my favorite philosophers is Emmanuel Levinas, and it's the face-to-face that will ensure your ethical behavior. So we sit people in circles. The teacher becomes one member of the circle. We invite children to make art from difficult texts, impossible, boring texts. But if they are making art, they're engaged and they have to master the text to make a dance, to make a mural, to make a painting, to make a fashion show, to decorate a cookie, whatever it is. They decide what art form they're going to use, and we bring difficult texts for them to master. That's my proposal. After we make art, we sit around in a circle where everyone has the obligation to reflect on what did we do. So with the creative spirit that we learned to name by Schiller, this is the Spieltrieb, we stand back and then have an intellectual moment to reflect on the process. And you do that with 6-year-olds, with graduate students, with their parents. If the parents are illiterate, we read the text out loud anyway. Everyone can be an intellectual. Everyone can be an artist. This is Schiller's legacy to us. Kant would distinguish between artists who are special and crazy and weird, interesting, and Schiller said, no, we're all artists. Every time you figure out how to get past a conflict, you're making up something new. And this is an obligation, it's not just an opportunity. So that's what I would do. We call the project Pretexts. You saw Nassima Mohammed exercise her talent as a facilitator in Zimbabwe. She did this when she was 20 years old. We can teach anyone to be a good facilitator and liberate us from an educational system that's punishing. And it deforms us. We need to form people. And without an aesthetic education, it's very difficult to do. You know that aesthetics as a branch of philosophy and democracy in modern times were born together, and they depend on one another. So if we're worried about an erosion of democratic practices, we should also be worried about the erosion of patience for aesthetic judgment, disinterested conversation where everyone is interesting and where dissensus is an opportunity to continue the conversation rather than stop it. If we take Schiller seriously, we're all artists. And we're all making artificial combinations of things all the time. There's no way to get dressed, to make a meal, to put a sentence together and not make something new, right? So if we thought of ourselves as creative artists when we teach, we can use a protocol, an artistic protocol. That's what pretext is. Anyone can follow a simple protocol. The first step is to read out loud because kids don't want to read. And some of them are illiterate, and some are dyslexic, and some are hyperactive. Read the text out loud while children are making something, a book cover, decorating a costume for something that they'll represent from the text. To do manual work while you're listening is a tradition that we learned from the cigar industry in the Caribbean. I don't know if you know this. Cigar rollers were sophisticated artisans, and they didn't want to be bored while they did repetitive, silent work. So they would collect money every week and hire a professional reader. And they would decide what books they wanted to hear. So if you're curious ever about labels of cigars with literary titles, like Romeo and Juliet, it's still a popular cigar brand, Monte Cristo, and Hemingway, and lots of titles of authors and books, it's because the cigar workers had very high expectations of their readers. They wanted to be intellectuals. A lot of them were illiterate, but they were all intellectuals. So we borrow that popular Latin American practice. We read out loud, and then everyone at your table or in the room asks a question of the text. It takes sophisticated literary critical training to begin to read that way. But once you're there, you know it's an obvious move. So you ask little children and older children to ask a question of the text. The entry point is not what you know, it's what you don't know. And that, again, democratizes and deepens the reading, because even if you didn't understand the text when you heard it, hearing 20 questions about it gives it a shape. And then the facilitator says, what should we do with this text? And we hear proposals. Let's dance it, let's sing it, let's paint it, let's draw it, let's cook it, let's make a fashion show. Whatever the kids want to do collectively, we do with the text, and then make another circle and say, what did we do? And everyone is obliged to make a reflection. Even in the circles yesterday, there were some people like myself who spoke too much. And there were some people who said nothing. If you make a simple ground rule, everyone says something, and you can speak again after everyone has spoken. There's been interesting research in organizational behavior about participation. If you participate early in a meeting, you will continue to participate. If you do not, you're silenced. So very often, women are silenced, minorities are silenced. If you make a simple ground rule, you avoid that. You don't encourage people to speak because that targets them. It's almost as punishing to ask someone to speak as not to let them. So this is the protocol. It's that simple. There isn't a cook or a taxi driver or a janitor who can't facilitate pretexts.